Welcome to Her Secret Truth, a place where the truth always comes out. Here you'll hear stories of family betrayals, hidden secrets, and shocking revelations. Every story is a step closer to the truth someone tried to hide. Subscribe to Her Secret Truth so you don't miss new stories you won't be able to stop watching. Laura's words struck me hard like a sharp slap across my face. She stood there in my son's kitlin, her wedding dress hanging perfectly behind her, untouched and pristine. With that artificial smile I had come to dislike so much, she calmly said that the best possible gift I could give would be to disappear from their family entirely. Daniel showed his agreement with a simple nod, not even lifting his eyes to look at me. Before going further, I need to give some context so you understand how everything led to this moment. Stay with me as I explain. 3 years earlier, I had sold my beautiful Victorian home, the one my late husband, James, and I had carefully restored together. I gave Daniel and Laura the down payment for their dream house, $87,000. That was my entire life savings, given freely with a mother's unconditional love. They had promised that I would always have a place there, that I would always remain part of their family. Now, on the day before their expensive wedding, which I was paying for, Laura had decided I was no longer needed. Daniel finally spoke, his voice cold, saying that this weekend was supposed to be special, and that my negativity was ruining everything. My negativity? I had spent the morning arranging flowers, the afternoon helping with last-minute preparations, and the evening listening to Laura complain about everything, from the weather to the caterer. The only thing I had suggested was that maybe ice sculptures shaped like swans were unnecessary. I asked where exactly I was supposed to go, keeping my voice calm, almost unnaturally so. Laura simply shrugged, focusing on her manicured nails, and said she did not know, maybe a hotel or my sister's place. She made it clear that it did not matter where I went, as long as I was not there the next day. I reminded her that it was also my son's house. Daniel hesitated, then awkwardly explained that it was more Laura's house now. He said she had been handling the finances and making improvements, while I had only given them some money once. Some money once. That was what $87,000 had become. I stood there in the kitlin where I had cooked countless family meals, looking at the granite countertops I had helped choose and the custom cabinets my money had made possible. They had taken everything I gave and convinced themselves they were entitled to it. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not broke but shifted, like a gear quietly locking into place. I agreed softly that I should leave. Laura looked surprised, as if she had expected tears or pleading, something she could later describe to her friends as me being difficult again. Instead, I told them I would pack my things and be gone within the hour. Daniel seemed relieved and said it was probably for the best, adding that we could talk after the honeymoon when things settled down. As if this were only a small disagreement. I went upstairs to the guest room, which had been my space for the past 6 months. Not my room, never that. It was always called the guest room, because guests are expected to leave eventually. As I packed my clothes into my suitcase, I could hear them downstairs already discussing how to use the space. Laura wanted a yoga studio, while Daniel thought it would make a good office. Neither of them stopped to consider that they might feel some guilt about pushing out the woman who had made their life possible. I paused when I saw James's photograph on the nightstand. 43 years of marriage, and he had never once made me feel unwelcome in my own home. I quietly told him that I would not go down without a fight. But first there were calls I needed to make. Sitting in my car outside their house, no, outside the house my money had helped buy, I took out my phone and dialed my lawyer's emergency number. Evelyn Lynn had been handling my affairs since James passed away, and she had warned me this might happen. When she answered, she sounded concerned and asked if everything was all right, noting that it was Saturday evening. I asked her to pull all the documentation related to the house purchase. She paused, then asked if something had happened with Daniel and Laura. I told her everything, the ultimatum, the betrayal, and how they dismissed my contribution as nothing more than some money once. She listened without interrupting, though I could hear her typing quickly. Then she admitted she had been worried about this for months, explaining that they had been treating my investment as a gift instead of what it really was. I asked what she meant. There was another pause, longer this time, before she reminded me about the additional documents I had signed, the ones she insisted on after I had raised concerns about Laura's spending habits. My heart started racing as I asked her to tell me if she had protected me. She explained that the $87,000 had not been a gift. Legally, it was a loan, and my name was on the deed as a co-owner. Laura had never signed the acknowledgement form she had sent, meaning that, in legal terms, I owned 35% of the house. I almost dropped the phone asking if she was serious. She confirmed it firmly, explaining that Laura had kept delaying signing the paperwork, while I had been focused on keeping peace in the family and never pushed the issue. Still, the mortgage listed me as a co-borrower, and the deed clearly showed my share. Everything was completely legal and binding. Through the Kitlin window, I could see Laura showing off her wedding dress to someone on a video call, most likely her mother. She was laughing and gesturing excitedly, completely unaware that the conversation happening at that very moment was about to change her life. I asked Evelyn, keeping it hypothetical, what would happen if I decided to sell my share of the house. She explained that, as a co-owner, I had every right to force a sale. The other owners would have the first right of refusal, meaning they could buy me out at the current market value. If they could not afford to do that, then the house would be put on the market, and the proceeds would be divided according to ownership percentages. As I listened, I saw Daniel appear in the Kitlin window, opening a bottle of champagne, clearly celebrating their freedom from what they saw as a burdensome mother. Without hesitation, I told Evelyn to prepare a notice of intent to sell, and to have it delivered first thing Monday morning. She asked if I was sure, reminding me that once the process began, it could not easily be reversed. I told her I had never been more certain in my life. They wanted me to disappear, and that was fine, but I would be taking my 35% with me. After ending the call, I sat there as the darkness settled in, watching my son and his fiancée toast their future in the house I had made possible. They had no idea that in less than 48 hours, their perfect little world was going to crumble. But first, I had one more call to make. I called Sunset Gardens Country Club, where Rachel answered. I introduced myself and said I needed to speak with the catering manager about the wedding reception scheduled for the next day. She sounded cheerful, mentioning that the wedding was tomorrow and asking how she could help. I explained that there had been a change of plans and that I needed to cancel the reception. She immediately reacted with concern, pointing out that it was less than 24 hours away, that the food had already been prepared, and that the staff had been scheduled. I told her I understood and that I was prepared to pay the cancellation fees. I also reminded her that I was the one who had signed the contract and paid the deposit, so I had the right to make changes. I could hear papers being checked as she confirmed the contract was under my name, though she suggested I should speak with the bride and groom first. I told her that would not be necessary and that I was making the decision myself, asking her to cancel everything. She hesitated and said respectfully that this seemed like something that should involve the couple. At that moment, I looked through the window and saw Laura trying on her veil again, likely for the 100th time that day. I told her the couple had made it very clear that my involvement in their lives was no longer welcome, so I was simply honoring their wishes. 20 minutes later, I checked into the Hampton Inn across town, ordered room service, and felt something I had not experienced in years: the satisfaction of taking control of my own life. My phone started ringing at 11:47 in the evening. Laura's voice came through the line loud and sharp, demanding to know what I had done. I calmly muted the television and told her I had honored her request. She wanted me to disappear, so I disappeared. She said the country club had called and told them I had canceled their reception, their wedding reception, and that there were 200 people expecting dinner the next day. I told her I was sure that was true and that it sounded like a problem. Daniel took the phone, sounding frustrated, saying this was insane, and that I could not cancel their wedding over something like sleeping arrangements. I explained that I had not canceled their wedding. They were still free to get married. I had only canceled the reception I was paying for, the one that had been costing me $14,000. There was silence. I had never mentioned the cost before, always avoiding the topic so they would not think about the sacrifices behind it. Laura's voice came back, quieter now, repeating the number while listing everything: the reception, the flowers, the photographer, the band. I asked if they thought it had all been free, as if money simply appeared because they wanted a perfect wedding. Daniel struggled, saying they could not tell 200 people there would be no reception. I told him they were adults and would figure something out, even adding that there were always simpler options available. Laura started crying loud and uncontrolled, Something that might have made me feel guilty 6 months ago. Now it only sounded like another tantrum. She asked how I could do this to them when they trusted me. I reminded her that she had told me to disappear from their family, and I was simply doing exactly that. She tried to explain that she had not meant forever, only for the weekend. I pointed out that her words had not sounded that way, and that I could not be expected to guess a different meaning. Daniel then tried to calm things down, asking me to talk like adults and come back so everything could be worked out. I reminded him that it was the same house where I was no longer welcome, where my presence ruined everything, and that I would not be returning. Laura demanded to know where I was staying. I told her that was no longer her concern, since she had made it clear my living arrangements were my own problem. I could hear frantic whispering in the background, likely them trying to figure out how to fix what they had caused. Daniel asked if I could at least call the country club back and say it had been a misunderstanding. I told him it was not a misunderstanding but a very clear decision made by the person who had been paying for everything. He asked about the guests, including Laura's family flying in from California, and what would happen to them. I told him they were still getting married and those guests could still attend, they just would not get a free dinner afterward. Laura took the phone back and said I was being vindictive and cruel. I told her calmly that what was truly cruel was telling the woman who had been supporting their dream wedding to disappear from their family, and that I was simply being financially responsible. She said this would ruin everything and that everyone would think they were broke. I repeated her words slowly, letting them linger in the air as I watched them grow uncomfortable. Now that it had been brought up, I added that without my financial support, they would likely find themselves broke very soon. I mentioned that this was something else we needed to discuss. Daniel's voice tightened with panic as he asked what I meant. I asked if he had actually looked at their household budget recently, whether he knew how their monthly expenses compared to their income. I could hear more frantic whispering in the background. I explained that I had been supporting their lifestyle in ways they probably had not even noticed. The grocery money I quietly gave Laura during shopping trips, the utility bills I paid online when they were short, the car repairs, insurance payments, and all the little emergencies that kept appearing. Laura insisted those had been gifts she received regularly. I questioned that, saying that from where I stood it looked much more like an allowance, and allowances can be stopped at any time. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had ended. Eventually Daniel asked what I wanted. That change in tone was interesting. Not long ago they wanted me gone, and now they were ready to negotiate. I told him I wanted exactly what they had offered, to disappear from their family permanently, and that I would be taking my money with me when I did. By Sunday morning my phone showed 37 missed calls and 41 text messages. I ignored all of them, enjoying a quiet breakfast through room service while reading the Sunday paper. The wedding was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. At 9 in the morning there was a knock on my hotel room door. Through the peephole I saw Daniel standing there in a wrinkled tuxedo shirt, looking like he had not slept. He asked me to talk. I opened the door but did not invite him in, instead asking if he should not be getting ready for his big day. He said that was exactly what he needed to talk about. His eyes were red and desperate as he explained that Laura was having a breakdown, locked in the bathroom and refusing to come out. He added that her mother was threatening to fly back to California, and that everything was falling apart. I told him I was sorry to hear that, and that I hoped they would work it out. He reacted sharply, saying I had destroyed their wedding. I corrected him, explaining that I had not destroyed anything, only removed my financial support, and that there was a difference. He pushed past me into the room, and I allowed it. Sometimes it is better to let people reveal themselves fully. He called the situation insane and reduced it to a misunderstanding about sleeping arrangements. I told him to sit down and he did. I stayed standing, looking at my 42-year-old son, who was finally beginning to understand that actions have consequences. I explained that this was not about sleeping arrangements, it was about respect, about gratitude, about treating the person who made their lifestyle possible like a human being instead of an inconvenience. He insisted they had always treated me well. I asked if that was really true. When had he last asked about my life, my interests, or my feelings? When had he invited me somewhere simply because he wanted my company, not because he needed help? He opened his mouth, then closed it. I told him I would wait. The silence stretched uncomfortably. I continued, asking when he had last called just to talk, when he had remembered my birthday without a reminder, and when he had treated me like his mother instead of his personal bank. He said that was not fair. I asked him how much money I had given him and Laura in the past year. He guessed vaguely, saying a few thousand here and there. I corrected him. $37,000 in small helps and emergencies, on top of the $87,000 for the house down payment. That made $124,000, more than many people earn in 2 years. He tried to say they had planned to pay me back. I questioned that, pointing out that Laura had been looking at a new car and that he had been browsing European vacations, yet neither of them had mentioned repayment even once. He slumped forward, holding his head, and asked what I wanted from him. I told him I wanted him to understand that I was not his personal source of money, that kindness and generosity are not endless, and that when someone is treated badly for long enough, they eventually stop caring. He said I was punishing them by ruining their wedding day. That statement confirmed everything I had been feeling. I told him I was not punishing them, I was protecting myself by ending a pattern of financial abuse. He reacted with disbelief, saying that was ridiculous. I asked if it really was. I explained that they had made me believe my only value to them was financial, that I received small bits of affection in exchange for large contributions, and that I had been made to feel guilty for having needs while everything I gave was taken for granted. I sat down across from him, leaning forward so he had to look at me. I reminded him that the day before, Laura had said the best gift I could give their family was to disappear permanently, and that he had agreed. After everything I had done and sacrificed, he had agreed that I should disappear. He said she had not meant it. She had meant it. I told him he had meant it too, just like Laura, and that now he was going to get exactly what he had asked for. He looked up sharply and asked what that meant. I smiled, and it was not a kind smile. I explained that it meant he needed to figure out how to pay for his own lifestyle from now on. It also meant he should hope Laura's parents were feeling generous. And it meant he should start looking at apartments because the house situation was about to become very complicated. He asked what I was talking about. I told him I was referring to the legal documents he never bothered to read before his father, and I helped with the down payment, the ones that made me a co-owner of his precious house. The color drained completely from his face. I confirmed it calmly, saying I owned 35% of the house and was about to put it on the market. Daniel stared at me as if I had just spoken in a language he could not understand. He insisted I could not own part of their house, that they had bought it and lived there. I reminded him that my $87,000 had gone into that down payment, and asked if he thought that money had simply disappeared. He tried to argue that I had said it was a gift, that I had wanted to help them get started. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Evelyn's email from the night before, pointing out that my lawyer had taken a different approach to protecting my investment. I asked if he wanted me to read the relevant legal documents. He said it was impossible and insisted Laura would have had to sign something. I told him she had been supposed to sign, but she kept forgetting to return the papers, and they had been kept on file anyway. Daniel was shaking now, whether from anger or fear. He accused me of planning everything. I told him that if I had been planning it, I would have done it before paying for his wedding. That truth seemed to land. I had spent $14,000 on a wedding for people who had just told me to disappear. If I had been scheming, I would have stopped everything months earlier. He asked what happened now, his voice smaller and defeated. I told him he had a choice. He could buy out my 35% share at the current market value, or we could sell the house and divide the proceeds. He said they could not afford to buy me out. The house was worth $300,000 now, and my share would be over $100,000. I told him I knew that and that I was good at math. That was why I had money while they were always struggling. He flinched and said they were not broke, just dealing with many expenses. I pointed out that their combined household income was $8,000 a month, while their mortgage alone was $2,400. Adding car payments, credit cards, utilities, groceries, and Laura's shopping habits, they were spending more than they earned every month. He asked how I knew all that. I told him it was because I had been making up the difference for the past 3 years and asked if he thought money had simply been appearing out of nowhere. The hotel room phone rang. I answered it while Daniel sat there processing everything. Rachel from Sunset Garden said the bride's mother was on another line asking about reinstating the reception, and was willing to pay all the costs if I allowed it to go ahead. I looked at Daniel, who was listening with desperate hope in his eyes. I told Rachel it was very generous, but it would not be possible. Daniel started to speak, but I raised my hand to silence him. I explained that there were family dynamics involved that made it inappropriate for me to accept payment from other family members for an event I had chosen to cancel. She said she understood and asked if she should confirm that the cancellation would stand. I said yes and asked her to send my final bill to the hotel so I could settle everything I owed. After hanging up, I turned back to Daniel and told him that Laura's mother had been willing to pay $14,000 to save the reception. He said she had been planning the wedding for months and had invited half her country club. I said that was nice for her, but it was unfortunate her daughter could not manage to be civil to the person who had originally been paying for everything. Daniel pulled out his phone and said he needed to call Laura, so they could figure out what to do about the house. I told him to go ahead, but added that when he spoke to his wife, he needed to understand something. I was not the same woman who had walked out of their house the night before. That woman had been desperate to keep peace in the family at any cost. This one was done being taken advantage of. He asked if I was really going to force them to sell their home. I told him I was going to exercise my legal rights as a co-owner, and what they chose to do with that information was up to them. He left without another word, probably to deliver the worst news of Laura's life on what was supposed to be the happiest day. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. Laura's voice was barely recognizable through her tears as she said we needed to talk. I told her calmly that we really did not, because she had made it very clear the day before that talking to me was not something she wanted. She said she had been upset. She said she had been stressed because of the wedding and had not meant what she said. I told her calmly that of course she had been upset, and that it must be exhausting pretending to tolerate someone she so clearly despised. Laura insisted she did not despise me. I reminded her that in the 3 years since she had moved into the house I bought for them, she had never once thanked me, not a single time. She had never asked about my life, my interests, or my health. She had never invited me anywhere unless she needed something, help with babysitting, bringing food, or writing a check. She tried to deny it. I asked her when the last time was that she had called just to see how I was doing. Silence followed. I told her I would save her the effort of thinking about it. It had never happened. She had never once called just to check on me. She tried to justify it by saying I was Daniel's mother, that I was family. I reminded her that the day before, she had said the best gift I could give their family was to disappear permanently, and now she was calling me family. I asked her which one it was. More crying followed, the kind of desperate sobbing that once would have made me rush to comfort her. She begged, saying she would do anything, that she would apologize publicly and even pay me back. I asked her with what money, reminding her she did not work and was a full-time homemaker in a house she could not afford without my support. She said she would get a job. I told her that was a good idea and that she absolutely should, but it did not change the current situation with the house. She hesitated, then suggested they could agree to pay me back for everything I had given them over the years. I almost laughed. I told her that she owed me $124,000, and at minimum wage it would take her around 6 years to earn that amount, assuming she spent nothing on anything else. The silence that followed made it clear reality was finally sinking in. By 4 in the afternoon they had called 16 more times. I answered none of them. Instead, I sat in the hotel restaurant, enjoying a late lunch while watching the local news. There was coverage of a wedding disaster at Sunset Gardens. No names were mentioned, but the footage of Laura standing on the country club steps in her wedding dress, crying, was unmistakable. Someone approached my table and asked if I was Helen Carter. I looked up and saw a woman around my age, with neatly styled gray hair and kind eyes. She seemed familiar, though I could not immediately place her. I apologized and asked if we knew each other. She introduced herself as Eleanor Langley, Laura's mother, and gestured toward the empty chair across from me, asking if she could sit. That was unexpected. Eleanor sat down with the calm composure of someone used to handling difficult social situations. She said she wanted to thank me. That was the last thing I expected to hear. She clarified that she was thanking me for showing her daughter who she really was. The waitress arrived and Eleanor ordered a coffee while I waited, curious about where this was going. She explained that she had been worried about Laura for years, the entitlement, the way she treated people she considered beneath her, and her complete lack of gratitude. She had hoped marriage would mature her, but instead seeing how Laura treated the very person who made her lifestyle possible had been shocking. When her coffee arrived, she took a sip before continuing. She said she had offered to pay for the reception, not because she supported Laura's behavior, but because she felt responsible for the 200 guests who had been inconvenienced. However, she added that I had been right to refuse. I asked if that was really the case. She confirmed it, explaining that her daughter needed to face real consequences, ones that could not be solved with money or connections. I studied her carefully. There was something refreshing about her honesty. She continued, saying Laura had called her in hysterics about the house and had demanded a loan to buy out my share. Eleanor told me she had refused completely. She said that if her daughter wanted to own a house, then she should have treated the co-owner with respect. I thought to myself that she was a woman after my own heart. She then asked if she could ask me something, wanting to know what my end goal was and whether I planned to force the sale. I admitted I had been asking myself the same question and honestly I had not decided yet. Part of me wanted to see if they could learn to support themselves without my money. Another part of me wanted to sell the house just to watch their perfect little world fall apart. And another part of me still remembered that Daniel was my son, despite everything. Eleanor nodded and said she understood. But she wanted to offer some advice from someone who had been enabling her daughter's bad behavior for 39 years. She told me not to save them from this. Whatever I decided about the house, she said I should not soften the consequences. Laura had never faced real consequences for treating people badly, and that had turned her into someone her own mother barely recognized. She reached into her purse and handed me a business card, explaining that she would be flying back to California the next day. If I ever wanted to talk to someone who understood what it was like to love an ungrateful child, I could call her. After Eleanor left, I sat alone with my thoughts and my phone, which was still buzzing with increasingly desperate messages. The truth was, I had not decided what I wanted my end goal to be. Until now, I had been reacting, protecting myself and setting boundaries, but now I needed to decide what came next. The most extreme option was forcing the sale. Daniel and Laura would have to find an apartment, probably in a much less desirable part of town, and finally understand what it meant to live within their means. A more merciful option would be offering to sell them my share for less than market value. Maybe just what I had originally invested. They would still struggle, but they might be able to keep their home. And then there was the spiteful option, holding on to my ownership indefinitely, collecting my share of expenses while watching them struggle month after month. As I sat there weighing everything, my phone rang again. This time it was not Daniel or Laura. The caller introduced himself as Detective Navarro from the Virginia Beach Police Department and said he was calling about a report of financial elder abuse. My blood went cold. He explained that someone had reported that family members were financially exploiting me and that there were concerns about my mental state, requesting a welfare check. I immediately understood. I assured him I was fully in control of my mental faculties and, if anything, thinking more clearly than I had in years. He said that was good to hear, but they still needed to follow up and asked if I could meet the next morning. I looked around the hotel restaurant at people going about their normal lives and felt a surge of anger at my son and daughter-in-law's latest move. I agreed and told him that I had quite a lot to discuss, just not in the way my family had described. After scheduling the meeting, I leaned back in my chair and smiled. If they wanted to play hardball, I was ready. It was time to show them what a real power move looked like. Detective Navarro was younger than I expected, around 40, with sharp eyes and a calm, patient demeanor that likely helped in situations like this. We met at the police station Monday morning, and I brought my entire financial file. He began by saying that the person who called seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being. I told him I was sure they did and added that my daughter-in-law was very good at sounding concerned when it suited her. I spread my bank statements across his desk and told him that over the past 3 years, I had given my son and his wife $124,000, asking if he wanted to see the documentation. His eyebrows rose as he looked through the papers, check after check, wire transfers and credit card payments made on their behalf, forming a clear pattern of financial dependence. He remarked carefully that it was a substantial amount. I agreed and explained that the moment I finally set boundaries about how they treated me, they decided I must be mentally incompetent. I then played the voicemail Laura had left at 3 a.m, accusing me of acting irrationally, saying normal people did not destroy their family over hurt feelings, and suggesting I needed help while Daniel believed I was having some kind of breakdown. Detective Navarro listened, taking notes. He asked if there had ever been any history of cognitive issues. I told him there had been none at all. I explained that I managed my own finances, maintained my household, and handled everything in my life independently. The only thing that had changed was that I had stopped allowing them to take advantage of me. I showed him the house documents Evelyn had sent. I explained that my lawyer could confirm I was a legal co-owner of the property, and that everything I was doing was completely within my rights, as someone protecting her assets. I also clarified the situation with the wedding, that I had been paying for a reception for people who had told me to disappear from their family, so I simply honored their request. We spoke for another 20 minutes. Detective Navarro was thorough but fair, and by the end of the conversation, he seemed satisfied that I was mentally competent and fully aware of my financial decisions. He said he would be closing the case as unfounded but offered information about elder financial abuse resources just in case. I told him I appreciated it, but that I believed I had the situation under control. As I drove away from the police station, my phone rang. It was Daniel again. He told me the police had contacted him and said they were not proceeding with the welfare check. I explained that was because I was not the one being financially abused in this situation. He asked what I meant. I told him that he and Laura had been draining my resources for years while giving nothing in return except disrespect, and that the detective had been very interested in the documentation I provided. There was a long pause before he asked if I was threatening them. I told him I was simply making it clear that their attempts to manipulate the situation were no longer going to work. He asked if we could sit down and talk like adults. I agreed, but said it would not happen at the house I co-owned, and not until Laura apologized for her behavior. He said she was sorry and had been crying for 2 days. I pointed out that the voicemail she left at 3 in the morning suggested she believed I was mentally unstable, not that she was sorry. After another pause, he asked where I wanted to meet. I told him we would meet at Evelyn Lynn's office the next day at 2 in the afternoon, and that he should bring Laura along with a realistic proposal for how they intended to handle the house situation. He repeated the word proposal. I reminded him that I owned 35% of a property worth $300,000, which represented my retirement security. Their options were simple: either they bought me out or we sold the house. After ending the call, I realized something had shifted between us. For the first time in years, they needed something from me more than I needed anything from them. Evelyn's office felt like neutral ground, filled with dark wood and shelves of legal books. Daniel and Laura arrived 15 minutes late, looking as though they had been arguing on the way there. Laura's eyes were swollen and red, her usual composure completely gone. She had clearly been crying for days, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy, until I remembered her words. She began immediately, saying she owed me a serious apology and that she had been overwhelmed and stressed, saying things she did not mean. I acknowledged it, telling her that it was a start. She looked surprised, as if she had expected instant forgiveness. Evelyn laid the documents out on the table and suggested reviewing the facts. She outlined that I had provided $87,000 for the down payment, that the mortgage listed me as a co-borrower, and that the deed gave me 35% ownership. Daniel studied the papers as if hoping they might somehow change. He said they had not known about the ownership arrangement. Evelyn pointed out that they would have known if Laura had signed the acknowledgement forms, which she had sent multiple times. Laura weakly said she had been busy with wedding planning. Evelyn questioned that calmly, pointing out the time frame. I let the silence sit for a moment before speaking again. I said that the real question now was how we were going to move forward, and that I had a proposal. They both leaned forward, hopeful. I explained the first option. They could buy out my 35% share at the current market value, which came to $105,000. Laura immediately went pale, saying they did not have that kind of money. I moved on to the second option. We would sell the house and divide the proceeds according to ownership percentages. Daniel said quietly that they would have to move. I confirmed that they would, to something they could actually afford. Laura asked desperately if there was a third option. I told her there was not. Those were the choices. Evelyn pulled out a calculator and explained that if the house were sold, after fees and costs, they would likely receive around $270,000. My share would be about $95,000, leaving them with around $175,000 to secure new housing. Laura protested that it would not be enough for anything decent. I told her it would be enough for a good apartment or a smaller home in a different neighborhood. I told him that was the kind of place people with their actual income should be living. Daniel ran his hands through his hair and asked if there was any way we could work out a payment plan, suggesting they could pay me monthly until they bought out my share. I had been waiting for that. I asked at what interest rate and with what collateral, reminding him they had already proven they did not honor financial agreements. He said that was not fair. I reminded him that they owed me $37,000 in emergency loans they had never intended to repay, and asked why I should trust them with another $100,000. Laura started crying again, saying this was going to destroy their lives. I told her it would not destroy their lives. It would force them to live within their means for the first time in their adult life. She asked about their credit and their reputation. I almost laughed and told her that their credit was already terrible, since they had been late on every bill for months. I knew that because I had been the one bailing them out. Evelyn cleared her throat and said she needed to advise them that Helen had every legal right to force a sale, and was already being more than generous by offering these options. Daniel asked how long they had to decide. I told him 30 days, which should give them time to explore their financing options. As we prepared to leave, Laura grabbed my arm and asked me to reconsider, saying she knew she had hurt me but that we were family and that should count for something. I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face. For just a moment, I saw the frightened young woman behind the entitled facade. I told her that family is supposed to count for something, and that was exactly the point. 2 weeks into their 30-day deadline, I received an unexpected visitor. Eleanor Langley stood at my hotel room door with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. She said she hoped I did not mind her stopping by, and explained she had gotten my hotel information from Evelyn Lynn. I invited her in, curious about what had brought Laura's mother back. She said she had come to check on the kids and to talk to me. I asked how they were doing. She said they were doing terribly. Laura was having daily panic attacks. Daniel was working overtime trying to secure a loan, and they were arguing constantly. I poured us both glasses of wine and was surprised to find I felt less satisfaction in their situation than I had expected. I asked her if she was there to ask me to reconsider. She said no and explained that she wanted to tell me about Laura's father. That was not what I expected. She said that he had spoiled Laura completely, every tantrum rewarded, every consequence softened, and every failure blamed on someone else. She paused, then added that when Laura was 16, she had totaled her car while driving drunk, and instead of facing the consequences, her father hired the best lawyer money could buy and had the charges dropped. I asked why she was telling me this. She said it was because she had watched her daughter become someone she no longer recognized, and had finally understood that her problems would not be solved with more money or more rescuing. Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a check, explaining that Laura had asked her to give it to me as a good faith payment toward buying out my share. It was for $25,000. I looked at the check but did not touch it. I asked what she had told Laura. She said she told her she would not be her enabler anymore. The check represented her husband's life insurance policy, money she had intended as Laura's inheritance, but she realized giving it now would only repeat the same pattern. She tore the check in half. I told her that was a lot of money. She said it was money Laura had not earned and did not deserve. She added that whatever I decided about the house, I had her full support, even if it meant they lost their home. She said that especially then, it might finally teach Laura what work and gratitude actually mean. After Eleanor left, I sat alone with my thoughts. For 3 years I had been enabling Laura just as much as her parents had. Every time I wrote a check to cover their shortfall, I had been teaching them that there would always be someone there to catch them when they fell. The real question now was what kind of lesson I wanted them to learn. My phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. He said they had been approved for a home equity loan that would cover $60,000 toward buying out my share, and he asked if we could meet to discuss a plan for paying the rest. I stared at the message for a long time. They were trying, which was more than they had done in years. But a home equity loan meant going deeper into debt, not learning how to live responsibly. I replied that we could discuss it, but I wanted to see a complete household budget along with a realistic plan for paying off all their debts, not just what they owed me. His response came immediately, agreeing to anything I asked and saying they just wanted to make things right. For the first time since all of this began, that felt like progress. The budget meeting, however, was eye-opening in the worst way. Daniel and Laura spread their financial documents across Evelyn's conference table like evidence in a case, which in a way they were. I started reviewing their monthly expenses. $400 on restaurants. Laura tried to justify it, saying they both worked long hours and were often too tired to cook. I pointed out that she did not work. She corrected herself awkwardly, saying Daniel worked long hours. I continued down the list. $300 a month on clothing. She claimed it was necessary to look presentable for social events. I asked what social events she was referring to since she did not have a job. Her face flushed, but I kept going. $200 for premium cable and streaming services. $150 for a gym membership she barely used. $800 in minimum credit card payments, mostly from shopping and travel expenses. Daniel quietly started adding numbers on his phone. He admitted it looked bad. I told him it looked like they were living a lifestyle that required about $12,000 a month, while they only earned $8,000. Laura suggested that with the home equity loan, they could pay off the credit cards and reduce their monthly expenses. I glanced at Evelyn, who was taking notes. I pointed out that they would simply be borrowing against the house to cover credit card debt, and asked what would happen when they built that debt up again. Laura insisted they would not, saying they had learned their lesson. I asked if they really had because nothing in the budget showed any real change. Still frequent dining out, unnecessary expenses, and shopping habits. Daniel leaned forward and asked what I would need to see to believe they were serious. Finally, the right question. I told him I wanted a budget that matched their actual income. I wanted them cooking at home, canceling unnecessary subscriptions, and I wanted Laura to get a job. She looked shocked at that suggestion. I reminded her that she was 39 years old with a college degree and fully capable of contributing financially. She argued that Daniel earned enough. I pointed out that clearly he did not, since they had relied on my money for 3 years. Evelyn then asked what exactly I was proposing. I had been thinking about it for days. I told them they could buy out my share for $75,000 instead of the full market value of $105,000, but there would be conditions. They both immediately paid attention. First, Laura would need to get a job within 60 days and keep it for at least 2 years. Second, they would sell one of their cars and use the money to reduce their debt. Third, they would follow a realistic budget, no restaurant meals, no unnecessary shopping, and no new debt for 2 years. Daniel asked how I would monitor that. I said there would be monthly financial check-ins with Evelyn, including bank statements, credit reports, and proof of income. If they broke any of the conditions, the full amount would become due immediately. Laura shook her head, saying it sounded like financial prison. I told her it was not prison, it was accountability. They asked for some time to discuss it privately. While they stood in the hallway talking quietly, Evelyn turned to me and said she could not decide whether what I was doing was very generous or very cruel. I told her it might be both. When they came back, Daniel spoke for the two of them, saying they accepted the terms. I asked if they meant all of them. He confirmed it, and Laura agreed as well, though she looked as if she was forcing herself to accept something bitter. Evelyn began preparing the agreement, mentioning it would need to be notarized and filed properly. As everything was finalized, I watched them sign, committing themselves to the next 2 years. Part of me felt a sense of victory. Another part felt sadness that it had come to this. But more than anything, I felt that I was finally teaching them something they should have learned long ago. That actions have consequences, and that family is not an excuse to treat people badly. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, a comfortable 2-bedroom place in a senior community with a pool and walking paths, when Laura called with unexpected news. She told me she had received a promotion. She had started working as a receptionist at a dental office, and now she had moved up to office manager. I told her that was wonderful and asked how she felt. She said she felt exhausted, but there was a lightness in her voice, a genuine laugh I had not heard from her in years, and she also felt proud. She admitted she had never realized she was good at organizing things. I told her she had always had that ability, she just had never needed to use it before. There was a pause before she said she owed me a real apology, not the rushed one from before. I told her I was listening. She admitted she had treated me badly for years, that she had seen me as nothing more than a source of money and had become angry when I showed any feelings about it. She said she used to tell herself I was being dramatic, But now she understood that she had been entitled and unkind. I set my coffee aside, surprised by how much her words affected me, and asked what had changed. She said working for her own money had changed everything. Realizing how difficult it was to save even a small amount, understanding what I had sacrificed, and seeing things differently. She added that Daniel was starting to understand as well, even if he still thought I had been harsh. Looking out my window, I could see people working in the community garden where I had signed up to help soon. I asked how things were between them. She said things were better. They talked more now, cooked together, and spent time doing simple things instead of spending money. I told her I was glad to hear that. She then asked if I would like to come over for dinner sometime. Nothing fancy, just something simple and time together that was not centered around money. I thought about it. The version of me from before would have agreed immediately, eager to fix everything. But I had learned to set boundaries. I told her I would like that, but suggested starting with lunch in a public place, taking things slowly. She agreed right away. After the call ended, I sat quietly, thinking about how different that conversation had felt. Laura had sounded like an adult, taking responsibility instead of making excuses. Maybe the lesson had finally taken hold. A message came in from Eleanor Langley, saying she had heard about Laura's promotion and thanking me for not giving up on her. I replied, thanking her for not stepping in to fix things for her daughter. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is allow them to face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes love means saying no. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give is the chance for someone to discover who they are when no one is there to catch them. For 3 years I had been their safety net, and in doing that I had taken away their chance to grow stronger on their own. When I finally removed that safety net, they learned to stand on their own, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. And maybe that was the most important lesson of all. Outside my window, the sun was setting over the walking trail where I had joined a seniors hiking group. The next day, I had plans to have lunch with a man named George, who had asked me out after we shared a laugh at the same joke during a recent book club meeting. At 68, I was finally learning what it felt like to be valued for who I was, not for what I could give. And that was worth more than all the money I had ever spent. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.